You're lying. That's what they said the first time I ever spoke the truth out loud. No mother would ever allow that. And no father would ever stand by. But I wasn't lying. Not then. Not now. And I've carried that truth for 71 years. My name is Eloise Margaret Brown, but folks in town used to just call me that odd little girl from the greenhouse near the well. I'm 82 years old today, sitting in a quiet room that smells of lavender and old paper, staring at the photograph of a girl I hardly recognize anymore. Before we dive into this story, please kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the like button, and also comment where you are watching from. I was 9 the first time I knew I was truly alone in this world. It wasn't the day my mother died, though, that was the first crack in my world. No, it was months later, when my father brought a stranger home and called her his wife. And called me nothing at all. Her name was Patty, but I never called her anything. She wasn't a mother. She wasn't a woman of warmth. She was just a shadow in the shape of a person sharp around the edges, cold where it counted. And when she walked into our house, she brought 2 things with her. 1, a black duffel bag she never let anyone touch. 2, and a dog, Rusty. That was his name. He wasn't cute. He wasn't playful. He was big, heavy, and quiet with those yellow eyes that followed you like a shadow even when he wasn't moving. The first time he licked my hand, my stomach turned, and I swear to you, I swear on everything I have left, that even then, something inside me whispered, "Run." But I had nowhere to run. After my mother died, my father became a ghost with fists. He didn't speak unless it was to command, and if I ever disobeyed, he didn't just raise his voice, he raised welts. So when Patty told me that Rusty would start sleeping in my room, I didn't question it. I just nodded and tried not to cry when she locked the door behind me that first night. I didn't know what wrong meant at that age, but I knew shame. I knew fear, and after a few weeks, I knew how to pretend like I was still human when inside I had been reduced to something unrecognizable. They say childhood is supposed to be the warmest season of your life. Mine was a blizzard, frozen, cruel, and eerily quiet, because even when I tried to scream, no one listened. Even when I begged my father to stop it, to look at me, to see me, he would just sip his beer, glance at Patty and say, "You always did exaggerate, just like your mother." In that room, with that dog, for years. But that's not where my story ends. Because one day, when my bones were brittle and my spirit was barely a whisper, a stranger stepped in. A stranger who reminded me that even the most broken people deserve to be saved. So sit with me. Listen closely, because this isn't just my story. It's a warning. It's a testimony. It's what happens when the people you love the most become the very reason you forget how to love yourself. I remember the exact smell in the house that day. It was Sunday. The kind of Sunday that usually smelled like Mama's cornbread and wood polish. But that day, it smelled like cheap perfume and wet dog fur. That's the first memory I have of her. Patte, the woman who walked into our home with a crooked smile and eyes that looked like they were always laughing at something cruel. She stood in the doorway with a little suitcase and a massive mutt on a rusted leash. The dog was bigger than me, brown, muscular, his head low and heavy, his tongue lolled out, thick and wet, and when his eyes locked with mine, my breath caught in my chest. My father didn't say much. He never really did anymore. After Mama died, he started spending long nights outside on the porch, chain smoking and drinking cheap bourbon. The house got quieter, sadder, and so did I. But on that Sunday, he stood straighter than I'd seen him in months, and announced, without looking at me, "This is Patty. She's your new mama now." New mama? I looked at him, confused. He didn't meet my eyes. He just turned and carried her suitcase into the house. Patty stared at me, lips thin and tight like she was sucking on a sour secret. Then she tugged the leash, and the dog padded inside like he owned the place. No one asked me how I felt about it. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked if I even remembered the sound of my real mama's voice. That night, dinner was awkward. Patty sat in Mama's chair, the one with the worn-out cushion that still smelled like rose lotion and fried plantains. She served spaghetti and salad like she was already queen of the castle. My father didn't even blink. I remember trying to eat, but the dog sat next to me, staring, breathing hard. Patty noticed I was uncomfortable and said, "Oh, don't mind Rusty. He likes girls. He's gentle when you're gentle," but something in her tone made me shiver. After dinner, I went to my little room at the back of the house, the one Mama decorated with pink curtains and sunflower bed sheets. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I curled up under the blanket, holding the worn-out stuffed rabbit Mama gave me on my 5th birthday. Then I heard footsteps. The door creaked open, and Patty's silhouette stood in the doorway, holding Rusty's leash. "He's going to sleep with you tonight. He gets nervous alone," she said flatly. She unclipped the leash, and Rusty jumped onto my bed without hesitation. I sat up, confused, trembling. Why can't he stay with you?" She laughed. A cold, sharp laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Because you're a big girl, Eloise, and big girls help out." She closed the door behind her and turned the lock. Click. That was the first time I ever felt truly caged. I sat on the edge of my bed as the dog curled up beside me. His body was hot. His breath smelled rotten. His eyes didn't blink. I stayed awake all night. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in silence, frozen in fear, my small body tense under the thin blanket. I waited for someone to come. Maybe my father. Maybe Mama's ghost. But no one came. That was the night I learned that sometimes monsters don't hide under your bed. Sometimes they sleep right beside you. I didn't sleep at all that first night. I couldn't. The room was cold, but my skin burned with shame. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd feel Rusty shift beside me, his fur brushing against my legs, his breath hot on my arm. I sat still, muscles locked, afraid to move, afraid of what might happen if I did. By the time morning came, I hadn't said a word. My back ached, my stomach grumbled, and my soul, it just sat there, quiet, shaken, smaller than it had ever felt. When the door finally creaked open, the sunlight spilled in like a spotlight I didn't want. Patty stood in the doorway with a grin not the kind you give someone you love. No, hers was the grin of a cat watching a wounded bird try to fly. "Did you two have fun?" she asked, like it was a joke. I didn't answer. She walked in, ran her long red nails along Rusty's back, then grabbed my arm without warning. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into my skin. "You better learn quick," she hissed. "You don't get to say no in this house." She dragged me to the kitchen where my father was already seated, sipping his black coffee like it was any other morning. He didn't look at me. I stood there, silently pleading for him to just notice, to see how I was trembling, to ask why there were dark circles under my eyes, why my sleeves were tugged down over fresh bruises. But he never looked up. "Eloise didn't eat her dinner last night," Patty said sweetly, as she placed a full plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. "So no breakfast today." My stomach groaned at the smell, but I knew better than to complain. I sat on the floor, hands folded, head low like some forgotten mutt waiting for scraps. Rusty sat beside me again, always beside me. I flinched every time his tail flicked or he let out one of those low growls. My father finally glanced my way, and all he said was, "You look tired. Don't bring that moody attitude to school." That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not all at once, but just enough to know that if he wouldn't protect me now, he never would. At school, I walked like my legs were made of glass every step. Careful, slow, like I might shatter. I didn't tell my teacher what was happening. I didn't tell my classmates. I couldn't. How do you explain that the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who make you wish you didn't exist? At lunch, I sat alone, picking at a crusty sandwich while the other girls giggled over paper dolls and hopscotch games. One girl, Tammy, asked why I had dirt on my knees and scratches on my neck. I told her it was the dog. She laughed and said, "You should teach it tricks." I smiled, because crying would have made me choke. That night, it happened again. Same routine, same dog, same locked door. But this time, I didn't even flinch. I just laid there, frozen, waiting for the night to end, waiting for my childhood to stop screaming for help, waiting for someone, anyone, to knock on that door and ask if I was okay. But no one came. Again. And so, I learned how to disappear. Right there, in the middle of my own home. There's something strange that happens when pain becomes normal. It stops surprising you. You stop crying. You stop hoping. You just exist. That's what I became. A quiet little ghost, floating through days I barely remember and nights I couldn't escape. I stopped asking questions. I stopped asking why. Why didn't my father care? Why did Patty hate me so much? Why did God leave? I stopped speaking unless spoken to. I stopped eating unless food was handed to me. I stopped laughing, even at the things that used to make me giggle until my sides hurt, like when Mama would wiggle her ears or sing to the chickens in the backyard. It was like someone had taken the girl I used to be and locked her in a tiny box somewhere deep inside me. And what was left was just something to be fed, ordered, and forgotten. Patty's cruelty became a routine, polished, practiced. She had a way of making every punishment feel deserved. She told me I smelled like rot, so she made me wash with cold water outside, even in the winter. She said I was stupid. So she tore my school books and made me copy pages from the Bible until my fingers cramped. She said I was wicked, so she locked me in the cellar for hours with Rusty at my feet, growling softly in the dark, like he could smell my shame. And through it all, my father, he just sat in his chair, night after night, sipping cheap liquor with the TV humming in the background. Sometimes he'd glance my way, but never for long. It was easier to pretend I wasn't there. The worst part? Nobody noticed. At school, I became that weird girl. I wore oversized sweaters even in summer. Not because I was cold, but because I didn't want anyone to see what was underneath. Bruises faded fast, but I felt every one of them, weeks after they disappeared. I didn't play at recess, didn't laugh, didn't speak unless I had to. One day, my teacher, Mrs. Brooks, knelt beside my desk and said, "You don't smile anymore, Eloise." What happened to my bright girl? I wanted to tell her everything, but my throat locked up. Like the truth was too big to fit through it. Like if I started talking, the whole classroom would drown in it. So I just looked at her and said, "I'm just tired." She nodded slowly and walked away. At home, things only got worse. Rusty had become Patty's weapon, not just a dog, but a reminder of what I was worth. She called him her baby, said he was more obedient than I'd ever be. And every night, he followed me into that room like a shadow I couldn't shake. If I tried to close the door early, she'd scream. If I wet the bed, which I started doing often, she'd rub my face in the sheets and call me a filthy animal. You want to act like a dog? Fine, be one. My mind started playing tricks on me. I'd hear whispers when no one was there. I'd feel crawling sensations on my skin even when I was clean. Sometimes I'd stare at the wall for hours, rocking slightly, just to remind myself I still existed. One night, I looked into the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back. Her eyes were hollow, her lips were cracked. Her hands shook when she tried to brush her hair. And for a split second I thought, Maybe if I disappear, they won't have anything left to break. But deep down, something still flickered like a single candle in a house full of darkness. A voice. A whisper. Faint, but stubborn. This isn't the end. I didn't believe it. Not yet. But maybe one day, I would. It was around my 10th birthday when I stopped feeling time. The days blended together like storm clouds in the sky, gray, cold, and without shape. I couldn't tell Mondays from Sundays anymore. All I knew was that every morning meant surviving, and every night meant enduring. No one baked me a cake that year. No one even said happy birthday. Instead, I woke up to Rusty's wet tongue across my cheek, and Patty yanking the covers off the bed. "You've slept enough," she snapped. "Get up, clean the porch, and don't you dare touch my coffee cups again. You broke one last week." I hadn't. Rusty had knocked it over, chasing his tail like a wild thing. But it didn't matter. Nothing I said mattered anymore. My voice had become an echo in my own house, soft, hollow, easily ignored. That morning, I scraped my knees, trying to scrub the wooden steps outside. The brush was old, the bristles hard. My fingers bled, but I didn't dare stop. Patty watched me through the window, drinking from the same red cup she always used, the one with a chip on the rim that looked like a tooth missing from a cruel smile. By the time I finished, the sun was high, and my stomach was twisting into knots. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. Not since I spilled juice on the table and my father snapped his belt across my back like I was some disobedient mule. He hadn't spoken a word to me since. That evening, something in me cracked. It wasn't a loud break, more like a silent snap in the middle of my chest, where my hope used to live. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, listening to Patty laugh from the kitchen. She laughed loudly now. More often. She had won. I heard her say to my father, "That girl's gonna be a problem soon. You better teach her where she belongs before she embarrasses us." My father didn't respond. He never did. He just drank his beer and turned up the radio. I looked at my reflection in the window. My face was thin, my eyes dark and empty. My bottom lip was cracked from biting it in my sleep. I was disappearing. Slowly. Quietly, and part of me started to think, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Later that night, after Rusty had curled up beside me again, and Patty had locked the door as usual, I reached under my pillow and pulled out the only thing I owned that reminded me of my mother, a torn photo of us on the porch swing. Her arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling. She had died too soon, too fast, and left me in a house that no longer felt like home. I pressed the photo to my chest and whispered, "Mama, if you're listening, please take me with you." It wasn't a prayer, it was a surrender. I didn't want to live, not like this. Not where I had to pretend I was human by day and sleep beside a beast by night. I started planning. I didn't know how or when, but I started thinking of ways to leave this world. I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop. But something happened the next morning. Something small, almost unnoticeable. As I was walking to school, head down, dragging my bag behind me, a woman called out to me from a fruit stall near the corner store. She wore a big straw hat and had soft wrinkles around her mouth, like she smiled a lot. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, handing me an apple without asking for a cent. "You look hungry." I froze. No one had spoken to me with kindness in so long. I'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded, took the apple and walked away quickly, hiding it in my coat. But I kept hearing her voice in my head all day. "You look hungry. Someone had seen me." Maybe not everyone in the world was blind. After that day with the apple, I started walking slower past the fruit stall. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything. But part of me hoped. She wasn't always there. Sometimes, it was a younger man who barely looked up as I passed. But on the days she was the lady with the straw hat and kind voice, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Zane, she never asked questions, never pushed, just looked at me with eyes that understood more than they should have. Some days she gave me a piece of bread. Other days, just a smile and a gentle, "Stay strong, baby." I clung to those words like rope around my sinking chest. Back home, nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. Patty grew more brazen. She no longer waited for my father to leave the room to insult me. One morning, while folding laundry, I dropped one of her silk scarves. Rusty jumped up and chewed the edge before I could stop him. I knew, instantly, what was coming. "You stupid little rodent!" she shrieked, storming into the room. "You ruin everything you touch!" She slapped me hard across the face. My ear rang for minutes. But the worst part wasn't the sting. It was the look in her eyes, not just hatred, but joy. She enjoyed it. My pain fed something inside her. And when my father walked in moments later and saw the slap mark on my cheek, he didn't ask what happened. He didn't flinch. He just said, "Don't make her mad again." As if I had chosen the punishment. As if I asked to be hit. The next night, Rusty climbed into bed as usual. Only this time, I didn't move. I let him. Not because I was numb, but because I had no fight left. He curled around me like a shadow with teeth, and I just stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster to distract myself from the shame pressing down on my chest. I was 10 years old, and I felt older than time. At school, I stopped talking to anyone. I couldn't make eye contact with teachers. The girls laughed behind their hands, whispering that I smelled, that I looked haunted. They weren't wrong. I did smell. I wasn't allowed to use the warm water in the mornings, and Patty made sure my clothes were never washed right. I was the ghost in the corner of every room. But then, one day, as I passed the fruit stall again, the lady whose name I still didn't know stepped around the stand and gently took my hand. I froze. She bent down to my eye level, looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I don't know what's happening to you, baby, but you don't deserve it." Those words, they broke me. I stood there, trying not to cry, trying to be strong like I always had, but the dam cracked. And I sobbed, right there, on the street, in front of people, in front of the world. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She pulled me into a warm hug and whispered, "Somebody's watching now. You're not alone anymore." That night, back in my cold room, I replayed her words over and over in my head. "You're not alone anymore." I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know how much she knew, or if she was just guessing. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a crack in the wall that had trapped me for so long, and through that tiny crack, a sliver of light began to shine. The next morning, something unusual happened. As I walked past the fruit stall, the kind woman wasn't there. Her spot was empty. No wooden crates of apples, no bright scarves, no gentle voice calling me baby. Just space. Empty. Like a heartbeat skipped. A knot grew in my stomach. I didn't realize how much I'd started depending on her presence. Until she wasn't there. For the next 3 days, I passed by that spot every morning, every afternoon, hoping she'd return. She didn't, and life at home? It got darker. It was a Sunday evening. My father was drunk again, reeking of beer and the perfume that wasn't my stepmother's. Patty had made stew and forced me to serve it. Rusty sat near the table, growling if I moved too fast. When I accidentally spilled a drop of broth on the tablecloth, my father roared, "Useless brat! You waste everything you touch." He grabbed my wrist and yanked me so hard I heard something pop in my shoulder. I screamed, not loudly, just enough for pain to escape, and he shoved me to the ground. The bowl shattered. Patty didn't blink. She laughed and sipped her wine. "Dogs eat better than you." she said with a smirk. Maybe that's why Rusty likes you so much. I lay on the floor, my arms screaming, my pride in shreds, and something in me broke quietly. Not loud like a bone, but silently like glass under a pillow. That night, I didn't sleep. My shoulder throbbed, but it wasn't just the physical pain that kept me awake. It was the terrifying realization that if I didn't leave that house soon, I might not survive much longer. In the middle of the night, I thought of her, the fruit stall woman. Her eyes, her hug, her voice whispering, "You're not alone anymore." Was she gone for good? Had she given up? But then, on Monday morning as I walked to school with my head low and my arm limp, I saw it. Not her, but something new. A folded piece of paper, tucked between the slats of the fruit stall's wooden leg, pinned with a clothespin. On it, in blue ink, just 5 words. "I'm still here. Watch close." My breath caught in my throat. I looked around. No one. No familiar hat or face. But the words were there. Hope, tiny, trembling, lit a spark in my chest. That afternoon, when I came home from school, Patty was already drinking. My father wasn't home yet. The house was quiet, except for the TV murmuring in the background. I tried to slip past her and into my room, but she grabbed my good arm and hissed, "Your father says you don't respect me. That ends tonight." She pulled me into the kitchen. On the table was a dog leash. Rusty's leash. She threw it at me and snarled, "Put it on. Crawl like the mutt you are." I froze. The room spun. My ears roared. When I didn't move fast enough, she slapped me across the mouth. Blood filled my tongue. I collapsed to the floor, trying to curl up, trying to disappear. And then, the door burst open. Not the front door, the back one. A voice, strong, female, familiar, shouted, "Don't you touch her again!" It was her, the fruit stall woman, with someone behind her, a tall man with a badge and fire in his eyes. Everything happened fast. Yelling, flashing lights, my father's truck tires screeching as he tried to leave, Rusty barking wildly, and me still on the floor, holding the leash in my hand, unsure if I was dreaming. The woman knelt down beside me, pulled me into her arms, and said, soft and sure, "It's over, baby. I got you." The sun woke me with a softness I'd forgotten existed. I blinked against its warmth, turning my head to find myself wrapped in a thick quilt, the scent of lavender and fresh linen drifting around me. No cold floors, no dog snarls, just gentle light, and a woman's steady breathing beside me. I sat up so slowly my head spun. The room was small and tidy, with pale blue walls and a single window overlooking a garden I hadn't noticed before. On the bedside table sat a glass of cool water and a single white daisy in a jar. Footsteps beyond the door. The knob turned, and the woman, Miss Harper, I'd come to know her, peeked in. Her eyes, kind and watchful, softened when she saw me awake. "Good morning, baby girl," she whispered, stepping inside. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing my hair back from my forehead. "You're safe now." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. Instead, I nodded, my body trembling both with relief and the memory of everything I'd suffered. She handed me the water. "Here, sip slowly." I drank, the coolness soothing the dryness in my mouth. "Where am I?" I croaked. "Over at my place," she said gently. "I called a few favors. Officer Gomez made sure your father and stepmother can't come near you. You're with me now." Tears sprang unbidden to my eyes. Why did you help me?" She smiled, but it didn't reach the sadness in her eyes. "Because no child should ever feel invisible. I saw you and I couldn't look away." I swallowed the lump in my throat. For the first time in months, I felt seen. That afternoon, Miss Harper guided me into her garden. The warm sun on my face felt like forgiveness. She brought out a small picnic blanket, fresh fruit, and soft bread, none of it laced with cruelty or punishment. We sat side by side, her telling me stories of her own childhood in this very town, how she dreamed of being a teacher, how she'd traveled the world with nothing but a backpack and a heart full of hope. When she spoke, I realized my heart still had room for dreams too. "I know it'll take time," she said, brushing a loose strand of my hair behind my ear. "But you deserve to laugh again, to feel light, even if it's just for a moment." I took a small bite of melon, the sweetness surprising me. I closed my eyes as juice slid down my chin, and for the first time, I cracked a genuine smile. That night, I lay in a bed that wasn't a battleground. I listened to the gentle creak of the old house settling, and instead of terror, I felt gratitude. A stranger had become my guardian, my protector, and maybe, in time, my friend. Before sleep claimed me, I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." And though my voice was small, it carried across the room, and I truly felt the first spark of hope since my mother's death. The days passed slowly in Miss Harper's home. Each sunrise brought quiet moments, warm meals, and gentle kindness, things I had once forgotten existed. But even in the peace of this new place, my mind remained a battlefield. I tried to laugh when Miss Harper cracked her silly jokes, but my smile often faded too quickly. The smallest sound, a door closing, footsteps behind me, the bark of a dog sent panic racing through my chest. At night, I still dreamed of the dark room, of my stepmother's harsh whispers, of my father's belt slicing the air. One afternoon, Miss Harper returned from the grocery store and found me curled in the hallway, shaking and gasping for breath. I'd heard a dog barking outside and everything inside me collapsed like a house of cards. She rushed to me, knelt down, and held me tightly as I cried. Not the quiet tears I'd learned to cry in secret, but deep, broken sobs that tore from my throat like a scream I'd been holding for years. "It's okay, Violet," she whispered again and again. "Let it out. I've got you. You're not there anymore." But it still felt like I was. Later, she made me tea and wrapped me in a shawl. We sat by the fireplace as the wind whistled outside, and she told me, "Healing ain't always gentle. Sometimes it drags up every shadow you've buried. But every time you face it, you take your power back, piece by piece." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. So, I nodded and sipped my tea, letting its warmth chase away some of the chill inside me. That night, she handed me a notebook. On the cover it said, "Your story matters. Write when the memories come," she said softly. "Don't hold them in anymore." I stared at the blank page, my hand trembling as I held the pen. Then slowly, shakily, I began. "My name is Violet. I am not what they called me. I am not trash. I am not weak. I am still here." And with those first few lines, I started to reclaim my voice, the one they had tried so hard to silence. The journal became my secret friend. Every night after dinner, while Miss Harper read in her rocking chair, I would sit by the window and write, sometimes with tears in my eyes, sometimes with shaking hands, but always with courage. I wrote about my mother's soft lullabies and the warmth of her arms before sickness stole her. I wrote about the day my stepmother arrived with her fake smile and heavy perfume. I wrote about the nights filled with pain, about the dog, the locked doors, the bruises I covered up, and the hunger that burned deeper than my belly. Each word felt like a key, unlocking another piece of my soul that had been trapped in silence for too long. One evening, after I finished a particularly hard entry, Miss Harper looked up from her book and asked, "Would you ever want to share your story with others, Violet?" I looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because your truth can heal," she said, Not just you, but someone else out there who's going through the same thing, thinking they're alone. The idea scared me. My story was ugly, painful, raw. Why would anyone want to hear it? But that night, I stared at the ceiling, Miss Harper's words echoing in my mind. What if my voice, my survival, could save someone else? The next morning, I asked if we could visit a local youth center. Miss Harper's eyes lit up, and 2 days later, we were standing in front of a small group of teenage girls, some with bruises hidden beneath their sleeves, others with eyes full of questions and pain I recognized too well. I read a part of my journal out loud. My voice trembled at first, but by the time I finished, the room was silent. One girl wiped her tears and whispered, "That sounds like me." Another whispered, "You're so brave." I wasn't sure I believed them, but something shifted in me that day. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor, like someone who had crawled through fire and come out not whole, but alive. Spring came like a gentle promise. Birds sang outside my window. The flowers Miss Harper planted began to bloom, and inside me something had begun to bloom too, a quiet strength I never knew I had. Each day felt a little lighter than the last. I still had nightmares sometimes. I still jumped at sudden noises. But now I had tools. I had words. I had hope. Miss Harper helped me enroll in therapy, and though I was nervous at first, I grew to trust the process. For once, someone was listening to me, not to judge or punish, but to understand. And in being understood, I felt seen. One afternoon, as we sat in her kitchen sipping sweet tea, Miss Harper smiled and said, "You're not the same girl who showed up on my porch, Violet. You've come so far." Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from gratitude. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a scholarship application for a creative writing program in Atlanta. "I think your story still has more to say," she told me, "and the world needs to hear it." For the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I had a future. A real one. A future filled with words, healing, and maybe even joy. As I packed my things weeks later, I looked back at the little room that had been my safe haven, the journal that saved me, and the woman who gave me back my life. I hugged her tight. "I'll never forget you," I whispered. "You don't have to," she smiled. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. Keep telling your truth. Someone out there needs to hear it." And now, dear viewer, you've heard my story too. If you felt something, if it made you cry, or remember, or hope, I ask you to do one thing. Subscribe to this channel so more people can hear stories like mine. And comment where you're watching from. Let's remind survivors everywhere that they're not alone. Because healing begins the moment we stop hiding. And together, we can turn pain into power. Thank you for listening.